I'm delighted after a busy few months to have the opportunity to sit and speak with documentary filmmaker Daniel Dewsbury, whose work includes The Mighty Red Car, Ian Wright, Home Truth, and most recently, Hatton, a documentary on Ricky the Hitman Hatton, which I am really looking forward to talking to. But before anything else, Dan, how are things with you?
Yeah, well, all good. Yeah, just kind of working away on new projects and yeah, and all that comes with that.
Yeah, I know. I'm really grateful for your time and that we finally got the chance to sit down and talk about this because I know you've been really busy over the last couple of months. But when you reflect on 2023 now, especially with Hatton and all that's achieved, um, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, do you know what? Firstly, I'm super grateful that I was able to make it and that people put their trust in me to make it because that's not that's not off the bat thing. There was a lot of firsts in Hatton for me. It was like, I'd worked on like what they call featured documentaries before, which are like 90-minute type films. But this was definitely like the first one that was on my own. And, the place that it was in when I kind of arrived on it, we could have made something, but I got backed by Sky and Noah to kind of try and make the best version of the film possible, whatever that took. And so yeah, so it was quite scary beginning it.
Yeah, I could imagine so. And when I look back, I mean, I was only really young when Ricky Hatton rose to prominence, but was still swept up in the fanfare and adulation for him because even now he's still my favorite boxer. Um, how did this opportunity sort of come to head to make a documentary on his life?
Well, how it works with people like me is that we all work freelance, and you know, and you kind of like pitch in for jobs. And I think with me, it was, I think there would have been like a list, and then eventually it gets down to someone like me, and then they're like, okay, you can make the documentary now, and that's how it happened with Noah. I know I'd been speaking to them a long time ago, and same with Sky, and they might have seen some of my old stuff, and it kind of went from there. And then what was exciting was the proposal was not to just make what normally happens in these kinds of things, like a hagiography of like how brilliant this person is. What it was an opportunity to really delve in deep to quite a lot of pain, quite a lot of kind of like deeper stuff, but have the sports narrative that goes through it of success or failure. And it was kind of like that presented a really interesting opportunity to me because I could see that other documentaries in and around similar subjects or about sport in general, I felt like I could do something similar, if not better than that. And that's kind of what I really wanted to achieve. And so, very luckily, went about trying to get all the people that would make that happen on board.
Yeah. And I mean, the documentary itself, from an aesthetic perspective, is absolutely gorgeous. Um, I think my favorite still shot of the doc would be where you can see Ricky in the door frame of his walk-in wardrobe, and like to the left half of the frame, you can see a framed picture of him in the ring. But we had a brief chat in the build up to this, talking about the theme and reoccurrence of dreams. I know you used the drums as a motif for that throughout, which I felt you pulled off really, really well. I wanted to ask, whose idea was it to set up a ring on Ricky's old estate, and what was that like from a practical perspective to shoot?
So like a lot of these things, what my approach on it is, with the team is kind of like to think, well, what's organic to this particular person? So, with Ricky, when I met him and first had a chat with him at the pub, it was like you could tell that he's a really genuine bloke. I think no one would dispute that. He also talks like he's talking, as if, like you're one of his mates. that in itself is like really, really hard to achieve with most sports people. They're usually very guarded, very, kind of like have a lot of, media around them and things like that. So they're used to kind of scripted type of answers. So as soon as I met him, I thought, okay, this is a massive opportunity just in terms of how he talks. And then secondly, what you want to do with that, or my approach to that, is to think visually, how do I marry up what my visuals are to this person? And so it's always a unique situation then. And it's, keeps it's really fun when you're thinking like that. And for Ricky, what it was that he knows where he comes from. He comes from that estate. That estate means everything to him. When he got knocked out, when he won stuff, the first thought in his head is about that state. And so from there, it became, well, what are the materials in a documentary like this that I've got? So I've got my interviews, I've got the archive, and I've got maybe some present day stuff, like that I would film with him in what we call like actuality. And then so to make something interesting narratively, it was like, what other place can I bring this up to make it feel like a higher level of something like that? And actually, what you want to be doing is you're inside his head, you're inside his mind. And there's lots of ways of kind of doing that. But my solution or my thought was what I would do was create an abstract space which I can intercut with the archive to raise the jeopardy of that archive. And so it was about seeing if we could get permission to put a boxing ring in his estate, persuading Ricky on a very cold day in November to come down and kind of like do this kind of stuff. And then also persuading him to be, like that first opening shot of him, like, knocked out in the ring.
Yeah,
And then,
go ahead.
yeah. And then also, can we interview him in the ring? Can we do some certain things in that space which will make him which will make the dynamic of the interviews slightly different. I guess it all comes from a place of just like, you know, it's our job, as kind of like filmmakers to kind of try and push things on a little bit. And you never, someone like me will never get the opportunity to go like completely wacko. But what you do get the opportunity with a lot is a big desire from places like Sky to move things on a few more degrees and to just try and to have an experiment. And obviously, the trick with that, just because you specifically talked about with the ring, is to make it visually in all essences kind of like different. So whether that was, Steve Middleditch, the great, kind of DOP I was working with, we were putting, kind of like Vaseline around the lenses. We were kind of like ameliorating kind of like some of that stuff. We were pushing kind of like it in the grade to kind of like be very different visually. And then also orally in terms of sound, we were doing very interesting things with that. And all those little things, I think they help 2% here, 2% there, 2% there. Basically, what they do is that they push it to kind of like an otherworldly space. And then for me, that's the most exciting bit. You're away then from the literal and you've got that in your pocket because of the great sports archive that we were able to acquire. And then what you want to do is kind of like go to kind of to move it into what's going on inside this person's mind. And as you quite rightly point out, we go back and forth from that to make it a motif and to make it feel coherent in terms of, a feature-length documentary.
Yeah, that's fantastic to sit and think about, really. I mean, one of my favorite little sequences comes in the opening of the film, really, where just before the title card, there's like a quick montage of everything that's happened in his career. And then you hear him scream, "Wake up!" And then the first shot following the title card is him asleep in bed, which again, I don't, it was took me to the second watch really when I thought that is really, really clever. And I thought fitting in with that motif of dreaming and the abstract, I thought it was fantastic. Um,
Yeah, well, I'm glad you noticed that because that was that too. As every single cut in this film is painful. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that, so just to kind of only because you've specifically highlighted that originally, I had Ricky waking up in the ring um, of the abstract, and he wakes up, but I mean, I think Ricky would say himself. I mean, it was comedic, if you know what I mean. And so. we then were like, well, I was talking to Sam, the editor, and it's like, well, if he's asleep, and then you don't expect people to pick up on it, but it's just like little things like that. When you're working on something, obviously every single thing that you're doing has an intention, and it was kind of being able to transition from space to space, became quite a big thing. That's where the drummer thing comes in as well. Do you know what I mean? It's like the drummer thing came in specifically because in the archive, when we were listening to, you could always hear those drums, and drums are an inherent sound of jeopardy or war happening and things like that. But actually, if you watch a lot of Ricky's fights, there's a lot of comedy, on his walk-ins, there's funny tracks and things like that. But that kills the jeopardy. So what we did was we used or isolated those drums and then moved it into the abstract space. So it's almost like if you imagine that ring and that drummer, that's what's going on. That's in Ricky's head, and it's kind of like, and it's like, the drums, the idea that something bad is going to happen soon, or he's going to have to reckon with something in his life soon. You wanted to see that really early, and then just kind of let that play out to, the reality of what happens in his life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And from a narrative standpoint, which is what I'm really looking forward to sort of delving in and discussing with you, obviously, because it's sort of a product of your mind, was I remember last year speaking to Gabriel Clark on the podcast, who mentioned that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to documentaries is just how fundamental it is to have a foundation of trust, not just with the main subject of the documentary, but all those you'll be speaking to, their family and those that are close to them.
Mm.
But watching it back, as I said, I've given it two watches now, and watching it back on that second watch, more than anything, within the telling of the story, I found it to be an exploration of Ricky's relationships with all these different people for all these different purposes. So, how big of a responsibility was it for you, especially when you think about it, when it came to dealing with some of the events that unfolded later on in Ricky's life?
Well, that's the central question, isn't it, really? And it's kind of like, what is very interesting about Ricky's life is all these conflicts. And actually, as you know, if you have a conflict with someone in your life, you might not want them to be in the documentary of your life. Do you know what I mean? And so my job had to be, how do I tell the best story? Well, I need Billy. I need the family. I need his ex-wife. Those are the three things that I felt like I needed. And we definitely 100% did not have any of them kind of in full honesty, at least, before we kind of began really. And it was and so it was, and everyone's obviously got a different story, but that's my job. My job is to find the truth through all these different perspectives. That's how you get to the truth. And it's kind of it's not from asking a very clever question, or it's not from just having an interview just with one person. Everyone has a different perspective, and that's why you kind of got to kind of do it that way. But to answer your question about the trust, there's a huge amount of trust. Like I can go into it, but it's just like with Billy, you know, turned us down about 3 or 4 times. I went up to where he lived, on the edge of the Peak District, and it was kind of like and it was really hard because the guy comes down in like a he's wearing a cap, it's got like a peacock feather in, and he's got like a walking stick which has like a, I don't know, like a Viking engraving on it. And so that's not the kind of person that you want rejecting you, because what you really want is that person being on camera because he's bloody brilliant. Do you know what I mean? And it was kind of and he rejected us a lot. And because, of his sensitivity, he's got potentially some type of agoraphobia, he's got mental health challenges that he'd be very happy to talk about. And also, fundamentally, at the end of it all, he's got a lot of pain in his life and has had a lot of time to think about that pain. But I loved him for that. That vulnerability that he was able to show isn't something that you see in 90% of the people that I interview. And so building trust with him had to be earned. And in the end, it's not just trust like, oh, we get on now, we can have a chat, which there is there. It's more like I'm going to ask you difficult questions and I'm going to expect the truth from you. And I'm a person who's interviewed enough people who knows when someone's kind of talking about who's talking the truth usually. Do you know what I mean? And it's and that's what I was trying to navigate with all these. Jen, um, Ricky's ex missus, you know, she kind of said it best to me when she also rejected me, and she was like, why would I want to do this? I'm happy to help you, seem like a nice person, but it's like, why would I want to do this? And I had to go away and have a think about it because I can't be in a position of saying, oh, you want to do this because of the X, Y, and Z. It actually has to come from her, and I can encourage that feeling. And so that's how trust is built, is kind of she basically came to the conclusion, I think, that without her voice in that film, you miss out a huge section of not just Ricky's life, of her life, and her vulnerabilities are, in my mind, as equal to being in that documentary as Ricky's. So it's interesting that on your second watch that you've kind of noticed that it's an exploration of kind of relationships, because that's what it is. I'm not interested in boxing. I like watching it. I thought it was all right. But I don't have a history of it. I don't have a history in sport, really. You know what I mean? And it's kind of but that isn't the point of this documentary. If I was making it for a specific sports audience, yes, then it would be. But what I'm trying to do is make a film which has inherent excitement, which boxing does, and everything else has to be about family. It has to be about the bigger themes. It has to be about the corruption that money can bring, or the fame can bring. How it destroys, really, really tight relationships with your family, your closest confidant in terms of your trainer, the relationships to have your missus and things like that, and how you navigate around that in your life. And I think one of the things that I'm really, really proud of is that we got those people on board and talked about them, weren't afraid. This is also to do with trust, weren't afraid of talking about the really difficult things. No one, every, however, any of the people who will talk about like feel about that documentary, what they won't be able to say is that I didn't treat them with absolute honesty, didn't skirt round a question, didn't kind of like hide anything from them. I was completely honest with every single person. And that is what trust is. And also with our type of documentaries, or the way I've been brought up in terms of, my background and my career, is you face up to each one of those people. So before that documentary went out, every single contributor who, gave a lot to it got a viewing of it. They were able to talk to me about the documentary, what they hated, what they liked, what they, and all of that kind of stuff. And if those points were editorially fair and justified, I would go back, and I had put time in the edit to go back and reassess some of those things. I might got too excited about a particular fight, or I might got gone too into the weeds about a particular relationship and things like that. And if I felt it was fair, it was up to me, my own morals and ethics, to make sure that I kind of dealt with that fairly. That is probably the biggest debate that's happening in documentaries right now. You have a lot of companies making documentaries whose owner is the subject of the documentary. So it's going to be unfairly biased anyway. And the one reason why I joined with Noah and with Sky on this documentary is because they said that we would have editorial control over that. And that's a very scary thing to sports personality, But the win is that I think Ricky's vulnerability makes him more endearing to an audience, makes you love him more, reminds you nostalgically of what those times were. And I think it enhances his reputation because of the vulnerability he shows. And that is very different from, I'd say, about 90% of the documentaries that get made about sports stars or music stars and things like that. And it's because I promised them that they would get a viewing and we would have a proper discussion about that, and then I would be in control of that editorial in terms of what made it in.
Most certainly. You said earlier about gaining the access almost to the interviewees. of the documentary. I'm interested in exploring the challenges of the making of the film. Would you say that was up there with the biggest challenges you had to face?
It was certainly like, when you work in documentary, so I worked in documentaries almost 20 years now, and it's kind of like, and the skills that I learned in the early days were knocking on doors, talking to people, persuading people, and all those kind of things. But since I've been a director, obviously I have like the ethical and editorial responsibility for getting those people on board. And I certainly wouldn't get anyone on board that I didn't feel deserved a voice in the film. And that's where my motivation comes from. So if I feel morally like I shouldn't be doing something, then I probably will be, my instinct will probably be not to try and persuade or push people as hard. But with this documentary, it was, they had Ricky on board, obviously, and they had his parents on board in a certain kind of way, a very caveated way, I must say, in terms of kind of, they wanted to tell their side of the story, but didn't want to talk about the things that, as a documentary maker, you would be interested in. And the family are lovely. Do you know what I mean? But with Billy and Jen, those are the two people who I really wanted on board. And those are the two people where I was like, if I get them on board, I can make a proper, definitive documentary about this. If I don't, it will always just be um, like quite a lot of the other documentaries that I watch with Ricky, where you get a part of his life. They might do that part really, really well, but it's just these little aspects of his life which don't really add up to the definitive kind of telling of the story. And yes, there's like a number of ways of doing that. I could use bits of archive of these people, but Billy hadn't spoken for years. And there was something, as you see in the documentary, I make a feature out of that about the myth of this kind of person. And I feel that's me being honest because he was mythical. He is an enigma. He was hard to find and get to and rejected me and kind of like lives in a little, kind of like weird house next to a mountain. You know what I mean? It's kind of like there's a lot of legend involved with that. And I love all that kind of stuff. And hopefully you see that in the documentary. I don't kind of shy away from that. And it was the same with Jen, like when Jen starts her interview in the film she talks about it, about how hard this is going to be for her to talk about it. And the thing that I think a lot of people forget is that the interview is only one element of the real picture of what's going on there. There's all the chats beforehand. There's all the chats after. There's all the chats after the film goes out and things like that. And that is all my responsibility to make sure it's called duty of care, right? And it's kind of to make sure that I have a duty of care to the contributors, to people who have might not be happy, but have kind of like, kind of told their story to me. And I take that with a huge amount of sense of responsibility. And that includes, I know we'll get on to talking about it, his family too. His mum and dad, gave their time and talked about very, very sensitive things. And I've kept in contact with all, well, as best as I can do with them too, because I treat them as equally as the vulnerabilities that Billy showed as well. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, certainly. And from an ethical perspective, it does seem like you took like a complete care of those people in terms of their perspective and what they added to the documentary. Like it wouldn't feel as complete without that. So it does feel as though you did a sensational job in that respect. So as there, that's as far as the challenges of the documentary, or one of the major challenges that are presented in the making of the documentary. As far as highlights, was there a moment in the making where you've thought, I'm making magic here? Because it must have seemed there's certain points of the documentary where I just couldn't help but be entirely engrossed.
There's in this particular film, there's quite a few moments actually. Normally I'm used to like never getting them or like getting one or two, in a film and it's kind of in this, God, there's so many. There was kind of, well, it was a few. So things that just because he put me on the spot, like things that kind of stick out. Like when Billy said yes, that was a great day. And then a couple of weeks later, he said no. And
Hmm.
then he said yes again. And then he said no. So by the time I actually got, and then we were about to film, and then he said no. That was an expensive day, having to justify it to Noah and all of that. And then when he finally said yes, and we got him in the chair, it was great. But that interview, I've got to tell you, like, people take pride in their interviews, and what I try and I don't really. What I try and do is try and make the interviews look as nice as possible with the help of great DOPs, but also try and make them as conversational as possible. So I go off in like random dog legs, and Billy's interview took 19 hours in total, and it was like and it's like that's kind of I know, like, the reason why I'm saying that is to obviously people who are in journalism like yourself and things. It's kind of that'd be really embarrassing. But I kind of see it as like a bit of a badge of honor, because it's like I persisted and I created a relationship through that interview. There's two worlds of, I know we're not really talking about, but in documentaries at the moment, there's two worlds going on. There's there's the very prescriptive, as in very scripted kind of documentary, and then a director turns up to the interview and looks at his piece of paper and goes, say this, say that, basically say this line, say this line, say this line. And those get made and they do really, really well. But like people like me can like see them from like a mile off. And there's documentaries which have a sense of, like, even though they're interviews, have a sense of realism to them, feel conversational. And that was my aim with every single one of these Ricky interviews. It was like, we will take as long as we need to take to get through the whole story. It will be better for that because it will be more conversational, and all the things that you're trying to cheat in those scripted documentaries won't need to be done here. And it'll be a real pain in the arse in the edit, but what you will have is something that feels really authentic and real. And that especially was important for this Ricky story, because he's naturally giving you that. And it would be a massive disservice to him to take that away and make it into just like certain lines, or getting him to repeat lines and things like that. And it's the same with Billy. Billy's using that, in the documentary, which is what you always want, really, is to kind of find some realization in the interview, to find some kind of catharsis in the interview, and to work things out in an interview with you. That's the pinnacle of like of everything that I kind of look for. And he was doing that. And I think, Jen a little bit less so, and obviously his mum and dad definitely weren't. They're trying to t tell you a story, and then you're trying to unpick that. So each one of these interviews, and Ricky's is trying to like balance all those things in his mind. So in each one of these interviews, it's a different approach that has to get done, and it's different mindset that you've got to go into. Do you know what I mean? For me, like, I enjoyed the Billy one the most because I got a lot out of it, and I also really enjoyed speaking with Jen because she's talking about very vulnerable things. I found it very difficult, speaking with his father, because would desperately try and suggest that being really honest is actually going to really help you in this kind of thing. But people have their own reasons, and want to kind of say their own truth. You know what I mean? And I'm sure from his father's perspective, that is his truth. And it's kind of like, but from my perspective, I think there's a lot more to it than that. And I've kind of been made that very clear to them, and make it very clear in the documentary as well, hopefully. But yeah, but then there's the whole edit process, which is obviously like fraught with pain. But certainly seeing what Sam did with the Costa Zoo fight, and then getting the comp I think there was a day where it was like the end of the Costa Zoo fight, and I knew in interview I had Billy saying, Billy, go, he's going to punch him in here. He's going, so Billy was excited. Then I also knew that I had Ricky saying the line, like, I looked at Billy, he said, we did it. And, no, we did it, you know what I mean? Or something like that. And I knew when you got lines like that and you put them together with an amazing fight, then the editor uses that abstract archive that we were talking about to kind of take him back to the ring and all of that. And then you have a composer like Matt Davidson, who I've worked with a lot before, adding, this kind of I'll be honest with you, like we kind of like it's he uses the same theme from Gladiator. Do you know at the very start of Gladiator where he puts his hand through the hay,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
like he uses that in there. And like I remember, like me and Sam had a big argument about it because Sam hated it, and I was like, "No, this is like my moment to be a bit Ridley Scott." And it was like, and we he put it all together, and it was just like that day watching the rough cut of that was like one of my most favorite days. And then the other thing was this is like the because you asked me like highlights, and then the last highlight for me was what I do is in terms of a process is when I get put on a project, first thing I do is write down the basics. So I put 10 bullet points of what I'm interested in, because once you get sucked into the project, you're into the weeds, you get totally lost. And you actually, the first day that you get told about something or learn something is actually what the audience wants to know. That's what they want to know, not all the detail. And it's kind of like, so I often go back to that first page. But what I also do is I create a Spotify, playlist in my mind. So, and it's really interesting to see how that changes. But one of the first tracks that I put in was the track that we use at the end, when like Ricky's like rounding everything up. And so it felt really, it kind of confirmed sometimes, and everyone has anxieties, and I certainly do. But like I always try and say to myself, I should stick with my instincts on certain things. And I had an instinct about getting Matt Davison to compose that Romanesque type music. And I had a real instinct. That was one of the first songs that I put down on my Spotify playlist of like, will fit with this person just instinctively. And it worked, and everyone really liked it. And it was kind of, and so it stayed.
Yeah. The payoff on that must have been really gratifying.
It's never happened to me before. So it was kind of like, so maybe I'm gaining more experience and getting better, or maybe I just got a bit lucky.
No, trust your instinct, mate. Trust your instinct. I also found it's very rarely wrong. On a similar subject, just veering off slightly, I'd be interested to hear with you saying that sport documentaries aren't your natural forte, and you're not necessarily into the boxing, as you said. What did the promoters add to your narrative then? What did Frank Warren and Oscar De La Hoya add to the development of the narrative? Because I certainly do feel like they played a role.
Definitely. Yeah. So obviously, like I wasn't, sometimes this helps as well. Like I'm not phased by celebrity or sporting icons and things like that. And I actually think that's a real advantage for someone like me. Like I've spent a lot of time interviewing people whose first question is, why do you want to interview me? And obviously this world is kind of like no one ever asks that question because it's just like it's a presupposition. Well, of course you're interviewing me. I'm a famous person, if you know what I mean. And so I treat it both equally, if not more so. And so with Frank and with Oscar, their personalities, and so they're going to bring something to that film. But what I was really interested in was the fact that they've got their own take. And the fascinating thing about the boxing world is that it's a little bit on the edge. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of a little bit like wheeler dealery kind of and all of that. Frank definitely typifies that. I mean, like he got shot, and it's like an Oscar. Well, yeah, I mean, all you need to do is do a Google search of Oscar to kind of like see all the things that he's been involved with and all of that kind of stuff throughout his very colorful life. And so you want to be one of those things. And actually, one of the funnest interviews that I've ever done was with Oscar because he was just like he was brilliant. He was really, really good. And I wanted him in loads more of the film, but Sam was like, "Well, you should only be in the film where he's in the archive, which is the right call." And it was like, but he was giving opinions on everything, and so and I kind of think very often it goes back to that prism thing, so Frank is there because he sees the opportunity. And so what you want to do is cross that with his father, who also sees the opportunity, but needs someone who can kind of raise him up, i.e. a Frank Warren. And then with Oscar, Oscar sees the opportunity. He's coming to Las Vegas. And then you can play filmically with Las Vegas and he just brings America to it. Do you know what I mean? And it was like you don't need anyone else really after that. Obviously, we go with Roberto Diaz as well, but it's kind of like Roberto Diaz is slightly being used in a different way because that's the outro of that's the the downward kind of slope which Diaz was brilliant on. But it was but certainly I was quite targeted about what I kind of want to do. It's also, you probably highlight this, is that it's the reason why we don't have Costa doing it. It's the reason why we don't have Floyd in it. He was a potential opportunity to kind of interview. Is because I wasn't trying to make a boxing film where you can kind of like, oh, they got this boxer and they got that boxer. That doesn't, hopefully I'm making clear, that doesn't excite me really. What excited me is that how do I kind of tell the other side? Because the archive of the fights tells that side of the story. So it's always what's going on underneath the surface that I'm interested in.
Yes, most definitely. That brings me on quite nicely to what I wanted to ask about next, because from again, from a narrative perspective, there's already a framework implicit in a sportsman's career.
Mm.
So they'll usually have a promising start, then they'll peak, and then they usually either ride off into the sunset or they crash and burn. Um, Compared to different projects where the focus is different, maybe I tried to find the Mighty Red Car to watch, but I could only really find like write-ups on it, which seemed the focus of that seemed to be like social, politic, sort of economic factors. How does that differ when compared to a sports documentary, for example?
Good question. So it's kind of like narrative is always narrative. So story is always told. It's just about engaging different ways of kind of telling story. And you just work. I just see it as like the metaphor for it for me is like if you're playing a card game and you get a certain number of cards, right? And then you've got to do the best with the cards that you got. And so with like the red car thing, it was okay, they want me to make a series which is fundamentally could be done in a poverty porn kind of way, that kind of thing. Looking really down on working class people and all of that kind of stuff, because that will just get as much ratings as anything. And because of my background, like that is the absolute opposite of what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was kind of like make people realize that people have the same types of aspirations and same dreams. So, but I've got to do it in a really engaging way. And so instead of going with people who are out of work and like of a certain age, we focused on young people and young people's dreams and what they want to achieve in their life, despite where they come from and how they can go about doing that. So putting a rose tilted or positive spin on that kind of thing. So that was that particular project. Sometimes you get access, like, I've done things about the police before or hospitals for. And then it's like, well, have I got access to this amazing kind of like brain surgery and maybe the character or the lead surgeon isn't that great as a character, but certainly this family who are going through this really difficult thing and want to talk about it, they're very interested. And so you basically go with the cards that you get, and you're totally right. Sport has a natural narrative. That's why lots of sports kind of documentaries get made. But the card that I was given really was you've got editorial control over this, and you have someone who you have after a few weeks of working on it, you've got access to different sides of the coin of this. You've got an actual 360 perspective, which a lot of people say they have, but very rarely do. And this was like one opportunity where you did have that. And so now it's about making the most of it. Like the card metaphor works because you can have the best cards, but if you don't use them, you might not make the best documentary. And so it's about knowing how to use those cards and or knowing how to utilize them best. Again, to continue that metaphor, if you're playing poker, you're bluffing quite a lot, and there's a lot, as you know, in documentaries, a lot of sleight of hand with how you kind of go about missing huge sections of one's life. And every film, whether 90 minutes or 10 hours, has to lose certain bits of that particular person's life. And with Ricky, was huge bits that had to go. I mean, his fight for the British title against John Thaxton, this is too in the detail about boxing, but it is like one of the most amazing fights that I've ever watched. And I'm not into boxing. That night was probably one of the most amazing nights. And that was in our film for a very long time. But in the end, you've got to kind of lose that because actually what it did was it took away from the win against Costa Zoo, just made it feel like a win, another loss, another loss, you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so because you're thinking about narrative, and so you just got to play the cards that you get kind of right. And actually, someone said this to me the other day, documentaries are just about people. And so the skills that I learned like I was telling you, when people were like, well, why do you want to film me? The reason why I want to film with you is because I think you've got a story to tell that's worthy of being on TV. And also, I think you can tell it really well. That should be applied to everything, no matter how famous someone is or anything. You see, you could probably name about 20 documentaries where it's really exciting that they've got access to this person, but the documentary is terrible. Do you know what I mean? Because actually that person doesn't fulfill those two main criteria, which is like, do you have an actual story to tell? And do you have the ability or are you allowed to kind of tell it? And that applies with everything. And that's always what you're looking for. And that's the reason why, my career jumps around, and invariably will have failure and success just as much as anything because I kind of I go with my curiosity. I go with what I feel like I'm interested in that point of time, and that keeps me interested. And I'm very aware that that is not what a lot of people do. A lot of people go focus on a particular area and then become the absolute best in that area. And fair enough, they do. That's a way of kind of doing it. But my own brain is like, well, I'm interested in people and I'm interested in storytelling. And what I can do with those two things, if they're good, is bring maybe an interesting visual thought to it or try something visually with it. And then if I'm doing those things, then that's a good place to be for me personally.
Yes, yes, I identify with that very much, and just what I'm gleaming from this conversation is that there is just a very sort of methodical thought process behind everything that you do go into, which in turn, in your role as a director, must work wonders in a sense, as proven by sort of the depth of the documentaries that you do make. I'd be interested to hear from a career perspective. Was becoming a director always the intention for you, or did a bunch of opportunities just open up and this is sort of the position that you've now found yourself in, or is it a combination of both?
Being kind of like it's a big, yeah, it's a very interesting question because obviously I don't have any parents or anyone or friends or anyone even in any way related to media. You know what I mean? And it's kind of and so how I found my way in was actually through a constriction. Like basically, I'd always wanted to go traveling. We're never going to be able to afford anything like that. So I started looking for jobs which where you could travel as part of it. And it was like, oh God, it was so long ago this, but it was like, I remember applying, do you know, like P&O, the ferries and things like that? I remember applying to like P&O because my friend had just got an internship for like doing something to do with sailing with P&O, do you know, like the cargo ships. But I noticed that there's a job on those ferries where you could video people. I was like, oh, I'm interested in that. That I would get to travel. I would get to do something that's kind of like fun. So I applied for all those, obviously got rejected straight away from all of those. And then so it became like, oh, I like travel documentaries, or like maybe I can try and work it in. And I applied for a competition and I got into that competition and I won like a month experience. That's what genuinely happened. I won a month experience. And then I just stuck there like glue, you know what I mean? And it was like, try to work out a bit like yourself, like try to work out kind of like who do I need to contact, who do I need to talk to, what are the psychological aspects of trying to get coffees with people, and then found my way. And then basically after a year, realized that actually less the travel that I'm interested in, it's actually the people that I'm really interested in, the psychology of all of that. And then started kind of honing it in a bit more. So I want to work on in inverted commas like good documentaries. And then there was a scheme at the BBC. It was another competition, which was at a place called Sheffield. Applied for that, got down to like the last four, so I had to like do a presentation on stage, and I won that, and that got me the opportunity to work in good, what I would call good documentaries, where it goes back to what I was saying before, where you're kind of thrown out onto the street and you're like knocking on doors, you're looking for characters, you're looking through the newspapers for stories, and you're trying to be like a proper documentary filmmaker. I could never ever hope to afford or even knew about film school or anything like that. And and actually you've got to turn those disadvantages into advantages. It's the thing that I kind of say to like teams now that I work with. It's like, what is the inherent disadvantage with this documentary? And how can we turn that to an advantage and make it feel like this is the only way that we would have been making this documentary? And occasionally it works. It works really well. Like say you were talking about Red Car before. The disadvantage with making that documentary in that town near Middlesbrough was that no one wanted you there. No one wanted you to make that documentary. So how do I make that into an advantage? The advantage is if I focus on young people, it'll be inherently positive, and there won't be any negativity that will be associated towards that town. And that's how you win, if you know what I mean. And it's kind of like, and it's the same with police where you're kind of struggling for access, or it's the same with prisons, which I've been in for, a long time, or like, or documentaries which are easier, like the sports genre. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of you kind of you just write down. And I don't really think of myself as like methodical. I kind of think of myself as like more like a bit, sounds bad, but like kind of like haphazard, as in it's like I like being surprised in interview. I like not knowing things. I like coming from a place of complete naivety, because I think that gives a sense of energy to what you finally come with. And I make myself very, very vulnerable to the contributors and to the team around me. Because then I think we all help each other, and that's how it's not intended, but it's kind of like that's how a team mentality kind of is fostered. And if someone is better than me on my team at doing something, I'm the first person to back down. I don't take any shame in kind of doing that. And if I think I'm good at something, then I'll kind of pursue that. But all I've ever done is just try to like watch as many things as possible, learn from as many things, watch them twice and see how, first time for enjoyment. That's what I always say. First time for enjoyment, second time to kind of like analyze. And I found that the things that I don't like are the things that I've got to watch more, because then you really kind of go, why don't I like this? You have a discussion in your own mind. And that is actually the same approach I've applied to everything I've been a director from. So if it was a hospital documentary, I will watch lots of hospital documentaries and try and work out what I like and what I don't like. If it's something about Ricky Hatton, I mean, the guy's made about like 25 documentaries, of varying quality. And I watched them all. I watched all the Sky Sports VTs. And then you glean. So you're learning by just doing that. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like that's how my brain works. Some people just read all the books, and because we were in a televisual medium, I feel like, well, the same challenges that they had, I'll have. So what can I learn from them, and how do I kind of move it forward and make something better, basically?
Yes, yes, I understand that. What I meant by the methodical comment was really that there are steps that it looks as though you take beforehand
Mm.
going into an interaction with someone that shows your transparency and your honesty in wanting that interaction, which leads me to ask, because I guess this is a huge hindrance from a podcasting perspective, which is like you were saying before, where you just want to figure out, what is the best way I can um, get my foot in the door to have a coffee with someone or to speak to someone that I wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do. Is that when you're dealing with intermediaries, for example, like agents or trying to get a hold with someone, you do get a lot of doors shut in your face. So I'm
Mm.
interested to know from you, what is your so do you have an initial reaction to when a door's shut in your face? And then do you sort of step back and think about it and figure a way to sort of get round it at all?
Well, because I kind of feel like I'm coming at something like in a genuine way, I kind of feel like I'm more annoyed when a door's shut in my face and they haven't even given me the opportunity to have a talk about it. Do you know what I mean? Or see whether they're interested in. Obviously, but I also appreciate different people have different things going on in their lives. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of, and I kind of like accept that quite a lot of the time. But what changes is when we embark on the journey of making a documentary together, and then probably like my passion for things kind of raises to that next level. So it's like, I'd begun working on the Ricky documentary. That meant I really wanted Billy in it, really wanted Billy, would do anything, And whereas if I start something and someone's like, well, look, you haven't got this person, you haven't got that person, you haven't got this person, then I approach it in a slightly different way. I kind of go, okay, well, okay, that's not great, but how do I make it my film by taking on those kinds of disadvantages and make a virtue of those kinds of things is kind of like that's the way that I approach it. And just going to your point about like getting people where there's like intermediaries involved, which is probably like, I guess, my world now, I guess, is kind of like, you learn very quickly in terms of like about what needs to be done in terms of the persuasion aspect of different approaches for different people. So if you're trying to get the Prime Minister of the UK or an MP on board, and you have to follow a very, very formalized approach. But within that formalized approach, you have to make sure that there's a reason for them doing it. And sometimes the reason won't be about what you're saying, it'll be to do with timing. So you're right, there is a methodicalness to it, because I'm kind of like thinking, well, like, I always believe there's a key to every single person being able to get into a documentary. It's just, and I think that's the thing that sends you crazy, because it's like if I said the right formation of words in the right way at the right time, you would be in this film. And it's kind of like, so I kind of go crazy sometimes thinking, what is the right way to approach it? Sometimes it's not me, sometimes it's using someone else and all that kind of stuff. But certainly with intermediaries, agents, sports agents, it is to do with um, money or promotion, and it's kind of like, what can you offer that kind of would make it done. Unfortunately for me, what I usually say is kind of like, let's talk about my reputation, talk about kind of things that we've done before and achieved before, and if people have the right reasoning for going into it, they want to make something quality. If they're going to give you like your time, they want to make sure they're going to make something good out of it. And that is where I usually win. And where I usually lose is where it's kind of like the people who I wanted were only interested in the money, usually. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like, because it means quite an unsatisfying interview. It means, and everything goes downhill from that point onwards. Do you know what I mean? So, as I say, it takes a lot more chatting than what it normally does, because normally it's kind of like an easier thing. It's like, oh, I've got like 50 grand, 10 grand, 5 grand, you know what I mean? It's like, yes, no, they'll be there and you can have 20 minutes of your time with them. It's not going to lead to a great thing, but if you sell someone in to the concept that what we're trying to do here is make this, make that, and we can't do it without you, and your voice is X, Y, and Z, and all of that kind of stuff. And if I can promise anything, I can promise that I'm really passionate about the thing that I've started because I'm curious about that project. People come into it with those reasons, then I usually don't let them, or make sure I don't let them down. Do you know what I mean? And that's probably the reason why Billy and Jen and loads of other people have kind of come on board with documentaries that I've made before, because they can tell I'm not just in it, to pass the time. I'm kind of like, I really do have a genuine desire to tell their story or make and make the best thing I can.
Yes. So essentially, like appealing to the right motivation from
Yeah.
their perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
think, yeah,
allowing
yeah.
them.
Obviously, look, I know in your world, like, you're not going to get that all the time, and I don't get it in my world all the time either. But I think people definitely have an instinct. The right people that I like have an instinct on whether someone's genuine or not, and it's like, and that's why you can maintain those relationships even though when they're difficult. Like the first thing I usually say to people, I was like, look, you're not going to like everything that we're going to talk about. It's going to think, but if you approach this in the right way, with the right, kind of frame of mind, years later, when the documentary's forgotten about, no one's talking about it anymore. Months later, or weeks later, when the documentary, everything's forgotten about, it's kind of like you will still have something that in your own mind was a good reason to do it. It's like, honestly, it's like, it's the thing that I kind of chat about with so many people now. It's like, I'm less interested in the final product. I'm much more interested in the process. And I know where in the process that I've done, at least the past few years, the product might not be that great in truth, but the process that I went through was for all the right reasons. I really enjoy myself. I kind of had a, feel like they got something out of it much as I did and things like that. And then that ties back into that ethical morality of like why you're doing this. Because as you know, in media, a lot of times you can get completely demonized, and actually it's stratified in different ways, isn't it, really? Like a documentary might be very different to like, someone trying to get some kind of like salaciousness or, or something like that. It's about the approach, and it's about the way that you're coming into it. And I think hopefully people glean that from me, that I'm not going to be making a documentary which is going for the salacious. I'm going to be making a documentary which is hopefully a bit more nuanced than that, and kind of and appeals to that kind of concern, if you know what I mean.
Yes, yes, that definitely comes across. And maybe last 10, 15 minutes, look at just changing tone a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, but just because I'm a bit of a film geek myself, were there any particular movies, filmmakers, experiences that sort of helped shape your approach to your craft?
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so many. But it was just in terms of movies, like if you just look at Hatton, like all you need to do is watch, Raging Bull.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, obvious references like that. But like, but in terms of movie makers, or going back to what I was saying before, so I'm not like, if you were kind of to describe it, I'm not like looking to be a person who's like really good at that one genre of, like gangster movies or something like that. What I'm looking at is like, you look at like, who is it? Like, someone like Stanley Kubrick, who like every film was a different genre mainly, normally. Do you know what I mean? And it's like whether it's period piece or like a thriller or like a science fiction. I want to be able to do that in documentaries. So that's my path. And it's kind of, and it feels like every time I go into an interview, people want you for the thing that you made before, not for the thing that feels very out of your depth. Do you know what I mean? But I kind of like, because it's always about people, I kind of keep on, hopefully I keep on getting those jobs where it's like, oh, that's a bit strange. I want people to be like, oh, it's very odd that Dan's gone in for that type of documentary rather than that. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm doing just finished like a World War II documentary now, and it's like, yeah, if I'm honest with you, I'm probably not the right person to be making that, but 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 I kind of like, I love the idea of being able to, because I'm interested in that area of the world, like to be able to kind of do that. And I kind of like, that's what I think the thing that would kill me would be not having to do the same type of documentary again and again and again. It doesn't mean that I won't go back to it, but it's just like my brain just isn't wired in that kind of way. But in terms of influences, I used to work in like BBC Archive for a time, and so I used to watch all the documentaries from the 1980s and the 90s. And what you realize with them is, because maybe they've had more time or more ability to craft, there's some real key learnings out of that. And there's always a different creative way to approach the subject. And it just depends on what your resources are and your ability to be able to kind of go there in your mind, because it's just all storytelling, and it's like there's some rules to it, sure, but it's like, but through constriction you can push in different ways. And that's why hopefully, like, I think sometimes I get hired, because it's like I won't do things in like the standardized way. I will appreciate what needs to be done and the things that you need to tick off for a particular channel or streamer. But what I'll try and do is bring something interesting, more interesting to it. It might only be 2%, might be only like a shot or something like that, but I'll definitely it will have come from my own mind to kind of get us there and get us in that place. And I look for filmmakers that do that. So in documentaries, it's, Paweł Lukowski, who went on to kind of win like an Oscar for a Polish film that he kind of done. But his background was in the truth in terms of documentaries. And if you type his name up on YouTube, you'll see some of his documentaries. They're very, very creative. They're really, really interesting. They mess around with the idea of what is truth, and he's very interested in the internal, in terms of what's going on in people's minds. I appreciate filmmakers who kind of approach things in a very disciplined way, like say Asif Kapadia, kind of comes at it with like, I'm not going to show them in vision. What I'm going to do is, kind of frankenstein quite a lot of interviews together to make it feel like a deeper, more meaningful thing. And I'll hopefully get the budget in terms of archive to kind of be able to kind of make that happen. That's a massive change. The big things that have changed over TV documentaries is that the aesthetic level has increased. And it kind of rings around to you like one of your first questions is like, my background, what I used to get hired for a lot before I became a director is someone who could shoot really well and kind of like raise the level of the shooting to be, in inverted commas, cinematic. And actually, what I realized through that, it's not about making something look cinematic, it's making something feel coherent as a piece. And that needs to be the thought through all your shooting and everything in terms of a visual layer. So it's kind of like directors who do that, who I've worked for, like Kevin McDonald, started off in documentaries and now is in feature films and kind of documentaries and won an Oscar, is like, I identified that I needed to work with people like that and I would do anything, I stepped down from being a director, I kind of stepped down from being a producer, in my career path because I knew that if I took a step down and worked with this person, I will gain something from that. And so I feel very, very lucky that, within the world of documentary that I've got to work with really, really great people because they either saw something in me, but I got something out of that situation as well. I developed myself and it's very hard to do that as a director now, hence why I ended up working with Kevin McDonald. I just, took those year and a half to kind of make sure that even as a director, I was kind of getting something. And if you watch of any of his films documentary wise, are a lot to do with UGC. And it's like, user generated content. And it's like, well, how do you make something like that that's filmed on a phone cinematic? Is that, that is the challenge that he has, that he's very successful in doing. And it's like, well, so it's all these different approaches, all these different kind of challenges, they all go in my head and they come out in something hopefully that feels like it's got a bit of me in it. Do you know what I mean? Like I've never like I never kind of like I hate the idea of you can make something completely original. I don't believe that. I really don't believe that. Whatever people's influences from their childhood and what they watch and talking with people and reading great books and all of that kind of stuff all goes in their brain. And then what comes out might be something unique and interesting, but they haven't come up with it as like a spark of kind of like inspiration, at least what I've seen. It's like a spark of inspiration. You're just borrowing little bits, and then when you stick it all together, it becomes kind of like yours. And also, you can't forget, I'm not an artist. I don't make stuff. I get paid to do this job. So you have to work within the boundaries of what you've been paid in. So if you work for Netflix, you look at all the Netflix documentaries and you'll make something fairly similar to that, but which hopefully has your own voice in it. And it's the same for Sky, same with BBC, same with ITV and Channel 4. They all have their unique things that make them their channel, and you have to fit in with that whilst also getting your own, fun out of it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I feel like that's a great note to end on. And as far as what you were saying is in that sort of collaborative effort, learning from people around you. I think that was one of, if not the key motivations for me starting this podcast, is that I always look to learn something from every conversation that I have. And, listening to this back, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure there'll be so much that I can learn from it. It's been an absolute pleasure to pick your brain, and it'd be great to stay in touch. So for any future releases, if you ever wanted to jump on and promote or discuss them, then it'd be my pleasure to have you back on, mate. Thank you for your time.
Nice one. Cheers, Max.